Brainstorm, bringing great minds and ideas together, exploring a wide variety of opportunities, achieving academic excellence, using the latest technology, government's impact, preparing for 21st century careers, parenting and health issues, topics shaping tomorrow. Brainstorm with Lisa Willever, bringing great minds and ideas together.
Welcome to Brainstorm. I'm Lisa Willever, and today we're talking about the power of today's documentaries. Before we begin, let's learn a little bit more about our topic. While a documentary is technically a non-fiction motion picture created to instruct, educate, or maintain an historic record, the truth is they are so much more. They bring real stories and stories about real people to life. By adding the same effects used in motion pictures, they can easily capture an audience's attention. So that begs the question, if a picture is worth 1,000 words, how much is a great documentary worth? Joining me today is Dr. Sean Kilday, an associate professor and the chair of the Communications and Journalism Department at Rider University. So thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me, Lisa.
So tell us a little bit about yourself.
Okay, well, I'm the chairman of the Department of Communication and Journalism at Rider University, which is a small private comprehensive institution in central New Jersey. And I've been working there for about 20 years now. So that's my professional background. I'm married, I have 4 children, and I'm pretty busy these days. So
what drew you to that field? Of all the different fields you could have chosen, what drew you there?
The field of education?
Education, and more specifically communications, the journalism.
Production. I think, like a lot of young people, when I was in college, I didn't know what I wanted to do. And good
It's an epidemic.
Yeah, and I don't think that's bad. I think when you're 18, you shouldn't know exactly. Some students have that, but you know, you go in and you think you want to do something. I see very often students want to do something concrete, an accountant, a chemist. You know exactly what that is, you know. But a lot of the world isn't, you know, the world's not full of accountants and chemists. There's a lot of different things that you can do. And I was just, I don't know, always sort of had, I think, a decent ability to communicate with people effectively, both written and orally. I enjoyed it. I started out studying science, even though I didn't have a science background. But again, I think I thought, well, this is something real and concrete. Not only did I not have an aptitude for it, but I didn't enjoy it. I had no passion for it.
Other than that, it was great.
Yeah, okay. I thought it was interesting, you know, but so I ended up going down this route of communication, and then I got really interested in broadcasting. So I'd worked a few years out of school at production companies. I worked for QVC, the home shopping channel, way back. I was on a first-name basis with Joan Rivers and Marie Osmond and Kathy Lee Gifford, and all those folks. But all those sort of, like, you know, celebrity people who would you know, hawk stuff on TV. And then sort of by chance of luck, an opportunity opened up at my alma mater where I could go back. They were opening up a new TV studio. And what it meant was I could go back and get my advanced degrees, and that was something I figured I would do later in life. I know now I never would have. Because
everybody has that on the to-do list.
Exactly. Okay. So it was a way for me to do it quickly and cheaply, but I really actually enjoyed working in higher education very much. I could never see myself as a real teacher like you, like an actual educator of children, young minds. But college is a little bit different from that, and it's you know, I enjoyed it very much. So that's how I ended up where I am.
Well, when I decided to do an episode on documentaries, you were the first person that came to mind. And the reason I wanted to do this episode is I'm a huge fan of documentaries. You know, but it wasn't always that way. When I was young and when I was a kid, they were our punishment. So we lived in a row house, and if we got a little noisy, my dad would yell upstairs and say, "Knock it off." And if we didn't knock it off, then he would tell us to come down, and he'd say, "You sit there, and he would put on like a nature documentary, and it would be some kind of like blue South American beetle, and it would be like just these really uninteresting shots of the beetle and the monotone voice, and they were torture for us. And they've come such a long way. I mean, documentaries now, I think, are just so interesting. And I think when you can marry like the elements that make a movie a movie with the truth, something that you're learning. So tell me about, what draws you to a documentary?
Well, it's interesting what you say. I mean, the idea of using a documentary as punishment, I can totally relate to that.
It's so 1970s and 80s.
Yeah, I mean, and that says something about how they were produced, right? And what's interesting is you had just talked about, learning, having a visual representation, but learning about something. Well, your Blue Beetle documentary was that. It just wasn't done well. So the people who were making documentaries, I think very often were focused on the information transfer. And you have a background in education yourself, so just transferring information is not enough. In fact, you don't need a teacher if that's it.
Yeah.
Just put the words up on a board, And so at one point, and I think the History Channel had a lot to do with this, Discovery certainly.
Yeah.
People over there who weren't only scientists and science writers and things like that, really started to appreciate the importance of aesthetics and how important aesthetics are to telling a story. So when you watch a really good movie, if the aesthetics are poor, I'm talking about a narrative film. Like you watch a movie, and it could be a good story with decent characters and great performances, but if the aesthetics are really poor and crappy and it looks like some cheap movie, it's kind of tough to get over that, right? We're very discerning viewers now. We're very visual creatures by nature. So at some point, I know it was around sometime in the 90s. The History Channel really.
I was going to ask about when this transformation started.
Well, I mean, I can remember watching the History Channel maybe in college, like back in the early 90s, and people used to call it the Hitler Channel. And you'd put it on, and it was old black and white World War II things with a British guy narrating, and the map with the line going
and the
across,
music.
and the dramatic music.
Yeah.
The shots of the Third Reich and, marching and scary speeches by Hitler and all that stuff. And, it was kind of scary. The most compelling thing about it was this kind of horrible image of Hitler. But, I mean, overall, when they're telling the story of World War II and how it happened and the Allies and the Expeditionary Force and all that, it was just very dry, right? So I took a group of students one time to New York City to meet a producer of a show that I saw called, it was a documentary series called Engineering an Empire. Have you ever seen that by chance?
No, I haven't.
Just think of the concept here. They took Peter Weller. Do you know who that actor is? He's RoboCop.
Oh, okay.
And he's in a series of things. He's he's a pretty famous actor. Well, at one point in his career, he dropped everything, moved to Europe, I think Italy, and just studied ancient architecture. So he's an interesting guy. He hosted this series, which would talk about these different empires, right? The Aztecs and the Romans, of course, and the Greeks, and whatever that empire was at the time, who the great leader was. So you're learning all about the empire, but sort of the backbone to the whole thing was the architecture in that, right? So if you're learning about the Parthenon, how that was built, who was in charge when that happened, and you're seeing these incredible structures in ancient Rome, the aqueducts and all these kind of things, and you're like, I cannot believe that they could do this 2,000 years ago. It's amazing. And in Egypt, even further back, the engineering things they do. So it was such a great concept. It wasn't just, let's tell you about Egypt, let's tell you about the Roman Empire and all the names and rattle them off. Let's tie something, the interesting architecture that still exists today, thousands of years later. And then while you're using that as a structure, you're going to be learning about all these different characters. Boy, really, really
It's kind of like taking the content, all the information, and the storytelling aspect, and then the Hollywood, that movie-making type of thing. Because I did look up, I did some research on documentaries. I was trying to figure out where the transformation happened, and I saw during an interview, Michael Moore, who was a very famous documentary creator, said, don't ever make a documentary, make a movie. And it reminded me of, in school, when I teach, they said, don't just teach the information, create a lesson, create something, because you can have all the information. If somebody's not paying attention, your efforts are wasted. So if you create a documentary, even if it's filled with great information, if you don't entertain people, if you don't pull them in, they're not going to watch it. So it really defeats itself.
I like to say you want to compel people, not necessarily entertain, because I don't know why. Maybe I'm just the academic in me, but a documentary.
So since you became a doctor now?
Well, a documentarian, like a journalist, they've got to watch that. Michael Moore is heavily criticized. His films are heavily criticized in the film community. I mean, of course, they're some of the most successful ever done, and a lot of people love him, have a lot of fans. He has a lot of fans. But they're criticized as documentaries because he takes artistic license, or some people would say these are, things are taken out of context and things like that. So to say make a movie, I think a better way to say that is tell a story.
Okay.
And Moore, he does that, you know what I mean? And he does it very colorfully, and he's a funny guy. So he takes these very serious subject matter, and then he'll infuse himself. But but I think accuracy is really, really important, you know what I mean? And sometimes the colorful, entertaining way to tell a story, if you veer away from facts, that can get a little, that can get dicey, especially not so much with Moore, who really does polemics, but people who do historical documentaries and things like that.
Try to spice things up if it gets a little...
Spice things up, yeah, that can get dangerous really, really quickly. You know, I did a documentary once on a civil rights photojournalist, and he was this guy. He was raised in Minnesota, and he had an abusive father, who was sort of racist and anti-Semitic, and he had his wife was deaf. Right, the woman that he married was deaf. Now it was Flip's mom, but she was Jewish, and he would say these horrible things about her, and she couldn't hear. So he's really this abusive guy where the kids could hear him saying these horrible things about the mom being Jewish, you know. And she was he was a really good-looking guy, and she had some money, and it was kind of this ugly situation. But anyway, he came from an abused background, and early on in the storytelling, you learn that this guy really didn't like bullies, right? And then that leads him down this career path where he becomes a photographer because he's interested in that, but he ends up in the South shooting in these very dangerous circumstances very often, and really becomes this sort of really important, intrepid photojournalist in the civil rights movement. And he got to know Martin Luther King very well. And the day that Medgar Evers was shot, he drove all night to get to his house to document this, and he didn't even know that family. But to take, you know, somebody once wrote a story about the film I did, and they mixed up Myrlie Evers and Corinna Scott King. I was like, you know what I mean? This is kind of important, you know what I mean? Like who died when and where. So the facts are really paramount. You've got to, the facts are paramount, and then all of the, you know, making the story compelling using visual aesthetics and really good audio, reenactors and things like that. All that stuff has to be secondary, but it has to be. You know what I mean? Because like I said, without it, we're watching the Hitler channel. You know,
or the bug channel.
Or your blue bug thing, right?
The blue bug, climb a tree.
But just to jump back, the reason I was talking about this producer in New York, I took my students to meet her because she produced this Engineer for an Empire. I literally looked at the producer title in the end, searched her up. This is like 2000. I guess they're like 2007 or so. And I sent her an email, and she got back to me and said, sure, come up and visit me with the students, because these three students, one of whom produced this film about Flip Schulke, the civil rights photojournalist, I wanted them to meet and talk with a really talented documentary producer. She also did Ice Road Truckers. Is that what it was?
Yes.
Yeah, and it was funny because one of my students said to him when we got there, he literally said it like this: "Where do you get off making a show called Ice Road Truckers and putting it on the History Channel?" It's like, whoa.
I love the show. It's okay. Listen, we're going to take a break, and we will be back in a few more moments with some more with Dr. Sean Kilday. We'll be right back.
This is the story of a boy who is very sensitive to lights and sounds. So he built secret hiding places where nothing could get in. The boy didn't like looking people in the eye. It made him feel uncomfortable. One day, he found out he had something called autism. His family got him help, and slowly, he learned how to live with it better.
Early intervention can make a lifetime of difference. Learn the signs at autismspeaks.org.
They told me a bottle couldn't dream. That I would never become a superhero. But I learned how to fly. Just to come back in a new disguise. And be the hero that I've always wanted to be.
Look at you. You're at the top of your game. You're unstoppable. Nothing can throw you off track. Wait, is that your car? Uh-oh. Yeah, I saw that coming. That will throw you off track. You're looking at around 10 grand in fines, legal fees, and increased insurance rates. Let's try this again. Smart move. Because buzz driving is drunk driving.
We're back with more Brainstorm, and I'm joined by Dr. Sean Kilday from Rider University, and you were just telling us about a specific documentary. So why don't you finish your thought there?
Well, it was actually this specific producer who made this series that I really enjoyed. I brought my students to meet her at the History Channel in New York City. And my student producers were asking her, how did you get into this business? And her background was in literature, which is interesting because she's a storyteller and she enjoys good storytelling. And she worked for a little company called SKG DreamWorks when they first opened up. She interviewed for a spot. She interviewed in their live action division, which no longer exists. But she interviewed for a spot. There were 500 people going for this position. She got it. She worked directly with Spielberg for years. The History Channel made a decision at one point this is according to her, to go out and just start poaching these really talented producers to start telling stories that were much more, as we said, interestingly told stories and compelling. Right? And so you get her and some other youngish producers coming in there, and all of a sudden everything changes dramatically. They start putting big budgets into these documentary series, and stuff looks great. And so we say it's not your daddy's History Channel, or it's not your daddy's documentary. It is not. You cannot punish a kid now by sticking them in front of the History Channel.
No, they will love it. They're going to be bad more.
It is some of the best stuff. And then that's history, which is the historical stuff. Go to Discovery Channel and look at what they're doing now. Wow, it is
biography.
It is not some tribe from Burkina Faso walking around in Africa, and you're seeing a wide shot of them washing their clothes. That stuff's gone.
No.
It is compelling, interesting, anthropological studies of these people and what they're doing, and they do it all quickly and just so well. Yeah.
I think the authenticity too from a documentary has leaked into other areas of entertainment, because when we watch movies, and my husband and our kids, we watch a lot of movies, whether we go to the movies or we do them on the TV and rent them. The first thing the kids would say, is this a true story? They always want to know if it's a true story, and I think it's because they've been raised watching so many documentaries and seeing how impressive true things are, that I think they almost have a better precedent for the kids. They are definitely something they enjoy more if they know the things that happen to a real person.
Well, I'm coming out of the narrative Hollywood. The true story has been around for a long time, and obviously, things are done to make them more interesting from a, Hollywood perspective, from a, to get an audience. When you're talking about a movie, a short, like a 2-hour journey, that's one thing. But when you look at documentary series or even television series now, like Mad Men and Breaking Bad and these types of shows, to me, they're much better in longer form. TV has really become much more interesting to me than the movie theaters, the things that they're producing, because the human story is not 2 hours, and many of us have had the experience of reading an incredible book and being very aggravated when you watch the film, because they have to, as a function of the art, take out all of the story, and that's aggravating. So I like the longer form stories, and Netflix, of course, is a game changer. Think about sports documentaries, right? Or the great sports films you've seen over the years, and about Lou Gehrig and all of these different.
My kids watch ESPN documentaries constantly.
Well, that's what I was just going to bring up. ESPN does this 30 for 30 series.
Yeah, that's
Have you seen
what it
these?
is. I've seen a couple with the kids. They watch all of them. Yeah,
and it's so many. I tell my students this is you can come in and watch a film. There's a film called Anvil, the story of Anvil, this awkwardly titled thing, and it's about a 1980s Canadian heavy metal band, like a spandex band, and these wacky dudes, and they're kind of ugly. And when the film was made about 10 years ago, they were about 50 years old, these guys, and they were kind of losers, and they're kind of, trying to. And so I start off the class by saying, how many people in this room, how many of you 19, 20-year-old kids care about 80s Canadian metal hair bands, And of course, none of them care, right?
Really? Nobody?
Right. So we start watching the film, and when you watch the film, you realize a really good story, a really good documentary is very often a story about human beings. And if things that happen to them that you can relate to, you don't have to be in a heavy metal band in 1981 to understand what it's like to be afraid of, how am I going to make money when I get out of college?
It's humanity.
Exactly. Or to have someone you love and watch them struggle and not succeed, and can empathize with that. By the end of the film, I won't ruin it, although it's an old film and most people aren't going to watch it, but by the end of the film, most of the folks in the class, something happens at the end, and I say, how many people cared that this happened? And all their hands go up. Say, this person told a great story. It doesn't matter what it's about. I'm not a Native American, but I can watch a great film about a Native American tribesman and be brought into it, because maybe he's got to go do something and he may not see his kids again. And I mean, all of these great storytelling techniques really matter. Well, watch a 30 for 30 on ESPN. you do not have to care about sports at all to watch incredible storytelling. And very often, sports are peripheral, tertiary even. They're sort of like the third most important thing in the story. It's sort of what draws the whole series together, but they did this incredible one on the Boston point shaving thing, which the guy lived in Trenton, New Jersey.
Really?
Yeah, the guy he played
Our
for
hometown.
Boston, he was a Trentonian. And but when they're telling the story, the mob gets involved, and it's Henry Hill is in it, the guy, the main subject of the film Goodfellas. And it's just this they're incredible storytellers.
You know what's interesting? You remember all of these documentaries you've watched, not for the facts. You remember the story. And when I was teaching 4th grade, I started every lesson. I was like, Gabe Cotter from Welcome Back Cotter. I started every lesson of the day with a story, something about when I was a kid, or with with Todd and I, because it was before I had kids. And I would always tell them a story because I knew that the story might trigger the memory of what the lesson was about. Right. It got their attention, they all sat up, and then I would tell them the story. Then we would start the lesson. Sometimes I'd throw more stories in. But I knew it was that, people remember stories. When I do school author visits, and I visit a school, and I tell a story about my brother, I can go back to that school 5 years later, and there will be a 6th grader who comes up to me, and they'll say, "Hey, how's Hardhead?" Now, they heard that story in 1st grade. They remember all the details because it's a story. Now, if I told them something just factual and informative, they wouldn't remember it at all. But stories are powerful, and I think, documentaries have really brought that to the forefront. They've really made people understand just how powerful they are.
Yeah, I would say film storytelling in general. But yeah, documentaries, it's just they weren't always good at telling stories. They were good at transferring facts, and they've become, the folks who do it now are extremely talented storytellers.
So now when your students come in, I think when people have telephones with really great cameras and great video, and there's cheap software, is there a phenomenon where a lot of people think they're automatically filmmakers because they have these things? What happens when they go into your classroom or they take classes? What do they learn beyond just having the equipment, but how to actually do it right?
Yeah, we start stories everything. So we start with that. You want to take an elective class while you're at Rider, I say go take a literature class.
That's
Go
great.
take a script writing course, learn about story. The visuals, anything tied with technology is just fleeting because the technology changes constantly. Also, if you start to tell your story based on what you can do with technology, you start to lose the story. So when drones, a few years ago, drones started popping up, and every film I'm seeing has this completely inexplicable shot of a drone rising 50, 100 feet in the air.
The shot nobody could ever get. There it is.
Yeah, well, look, we haven't been able to do this, so now we can do it. So let's do it.
Everybody's got it.
But why? But what does it add? Why did I just see this?
Because they got a new drone.
Yeah, because they got it, right. So it gets away from the story. It doesn't make any sense. But yeah, so everything starts with story.
And staying true to the story sounds like what you're saying. Despite, it might be dry, or you might have a new drone. Stay with the story.
For sure. I mean, if you're doing a documentary, right, depending on what you're doing. I had a student produce this amazing documentary last semester. She's a freshman, very talented, just had a great visual eye for things. But also, she had this compelling story about her best friend all through her life started to transition. She started to do, she was a female and she was going to become a male. And I don't know if she was going to go through the full surgery. And even in the class, I'm like, look, I honestly don't know all the, I don't know all the terms yet. So this can be sensitive. But if somebody says something out of turn, please don't take it personally because folks are trying to learn. The new language and all that kind of stuff. But she wasn't hung up on that. She just told this story about her friend, and her friend was going through this, compelling and in very many ways traumatic experience because, how do you tell your parents and what do you do and all this kind of, and what are my friends going to think? And she loves this person and, she didn't care what she was doing. And she told this incredible story about the person. And the visuals were amazing and it looked great, especially for a freshman using very limited equipment. But what really had you going back to that story was this relationship between these two people, you know what I mean? About how they were always
back
friends.
To the humanity.
Yeah. I mean,
that's amazing.
An example I use is March of the Penguins. Have you ever seen that?
Yes.
March of the Penguins is a story about birds in a barren white wasteland of snow, and yet people are drawn to that because these these incredible flightless birds do things that they can relate to. They mate for life, which I hear that may not be true. But
that's
don't ruin
it for all the kids out there. You and your science and facts.
When you watch it, it's a nature documentary, but it really kind of plays on people's humanity.
And it's definitely not the one I was punished to watch. So, are you ready to play Brainstorm?
I'm ready.
Okay, so Brainstorm, we are going to brainstorm right now. We have 8 ideas. If they're good, we keep them.
Okay.
If they're not so good, in the tradition of brainstorming, you get to ball them up and shoot a basket.
And if I win?
You get to empty the basket at the end.
On you?
Yeah, no. I don't. That's a little creative license there.
So I just shoot it in the bucket?
You just shoot it in, yeah.
All right.
And if you don't, you win nothing, but if you don't make it, you kind of lose. You don't look so good.
Gotcha.
So, idea number 1.
Yes.
Documentaries can provide information and inspiration.
Most definitely.
Okay. Number 2, caring about your topic is optional.
It's complicated. I have to give you a quick answer, right? I've had students who've worked on projects where they didn't care about the subject matter, like I told you about this heavy metal documentary, and they become invested in it as long as
But then
it's
they
about
start
human
caring.
beings.
So
and then they start
I think
to
if
care.
you don't care, probably not great.
So caring about your topic is optional. At one point, you need to care about it.
Okay, there you go. Give it a shot. Let's see. I'll even help you out here.
Shoot.
All right, there you go.
All right.
Number 3, documentaries often spark change of thought and action.
Absolutely, no doubt about it.
Okay. Number 4, truth in a documentary is optional.
No.
Okay, you're sure on that one, right?
That's a bad idea.
All right,
Yes.
make the Iron Mikes proud. There you go. Number 5, know everything about your topic and follow every lead.
No.
No?
You can't know everything about a topic. The most you
can.
know, the better. But if
All
I'm
right.
going by what it says, know everything about your topic.
Okay.
No,
Oh, I wish I had a buzzer. Maybe we could add that later.
I should have stopped talking.
Documentaries are a cross between journalism and storytelling.
Yes.
A great documentary.
Journalism very often is storytelling. It just involves the facts, right?
A great documentary stays with you after you watch it.
I think so.
Obviously, you've
I
been
think so.
reciting about 6 different ones here.
Yeah.
Number 8, documentaries are boring. Come on, pull that up. We know they're not boring. Throw that out there.
It depends.
They're not. They shouldn't be.
They shouldn't be. Okay.
boring.
Right.
Well, Sean, I want to thank you very much for being with us today.
Thanks for having me.
That was wonderful, and I want to thank the viewers. We will be back with another episode of Brainstorm next time. Take care.
Marie, you have prediabetes.
Prediabetes? I don't have time to eat right or exercise. I'm a busy mom.
Oh, you're a busy mom.
Yeah.
This is great news. Busy moms never get prediabetes.
Wait, what?
Let me just... Yeah, this is all the people at risk for prediabetes, and way over here, busy moms. No?
Everybody has a dream. Mine was to see the ocean. And with a little help, I made it.
Me and my boy Matt had it good. He had catnip that was off the hook. But one day, he brings a girl home, and she's allergic to cats. Every sneeze was a nail in my coffin. Now I'm in a shelter. It's decent, but they don't even have Wi-Fi.